Hello and welcome to our 5 minutes with Ekaterina Ukrainian poetry. I'm super excited today to present you Mykola Lukash because he is a translator who did such a great job that so many Ukrainians are getting to know the world famous poetry only because of this person. And talking about myself, I firstly read the lines of Paul Verlaine, translated by Mikola Lukash in my textbook for foreign literature. And I was so impressed that I learned these lines by heart. And for many, many years, I literally didn't know who did the translation. For those of you who are polyglots, that would be interesting to know that Mikola Lukash knew 20 languages, over the 20 languages, because by the end of his life, nobody knows how many was there in his collection. I'll tell you a little bit in a moment, a little bit more about that. But let's start with the early biography, because his life was very interesting and literally amazing. He was born in 1919 in Chernigiv region, and he was born in the family with many kids, but that was the time where the war, the civil war, and the establishment of Bolsheviks' power happened. And after Bolsheviks came, his family was stripped out of all their properties. They had to leave their house, and they lived in an extreme poverty. So the first years of the boy's life were very tough, and before the age of 4, he didn't speak. The person who later would know over 20 languages were not able to speak before the age of 4. And then he started a normal life of a Soviet child in living in quite of a poverty. And he would enter the university in Kiev, the historical department, only to leave it after several years and to start teaching languages. By the time of the Second World War, he already knew several of them, and when he was a soldier, when he was participating in the war, he was wounded and been captured. And there was a Hungarian sergeant who came saying in Hungarian that you wouldn't live for a long time because the injury was very bad. And he replied in Hungarian, and this soldier was so impressed that the foreigner knows, the enemy basically knows the Hungarian language so well, that he treated Mykola for his wounds with his own money, and that's how the future translator would survive. After the war, he would enter the philological faculty, the translation faculty in Kharkiv, and he would accomplish his studies being a translator. But he decided to pick as his translation language not Russian, which was the mainstream at the time of the Soviet Union, but his native Ukrainian. He was so good in that he collected dialects, he made dictionaries, he literally did amazing job with it, but it wasn't precious in the times of the total Russification. And only after 10 years of his studies in the early 50s, in 1953, the first translation made by Mikola Lukash was published, and several years after, there was the edition in Ukrainian of the famous Faust written by Goethe, and that work bring him fame, literally, because he was at the time the only translator who was able to translate the whole poem. Before him, there were many people doing it, but they literally quit their job after several lines or several poems, and then he did the whole of it. He started it during the war or right before the war, and it took him 18 years to finish the translation. The first edition of the translation, it was a handwriting, it was lost during the war, and he had to rewrite it again using his memory and maybe the more advanced skills that he acquired over these years. so this was the time when he was accepted as the official translator. Again, he wasn't popular because the Ukrainian translations were not popular at all. And doing these translations, working so hard as he did at the time, that was something very hard, very difficult at the time. And his popularity was mostly among the other people, among these poets, these other writers, and they recognized his talent actually. It was very highly recognized even back then. And I want to share with you the poem I was talking in the very beginning, the first part of this poem of Paul Verlaine, and then I would like to tell you about the second part of his life, which is quite sad. So let's read the poem together. Поль Марі Верлен в перекладі Миколи Лукаша. Брюссель. Прості фрески. Зеленаво й малиново у непевнім світлі лампи за вікном все знову і знову мерехтять пригорки й рампи. День сумирний на ущербі, вже на заході червінька, за віконцем знову і знову щось замислено цвірінька. В надвечір'ї золотому, що бурхливо догасає, передосень мою втому колисково колисає. And the second part of this poem is completely different from the first part in its rhyming in Ukrainian translation. Let me know if it's the same in the original, if you know French well. Leave me a comment below the video and let's read it together. Ах, алея ця, мабуть, без кінця, а вгорі блакить. Гарно бачить Бога, нам було б удвох тут з тобою жить. Он якісь пани, все чепуруни, до палацу йдуть. Як я заздрю їм, тим панам старим, добре ними будь. Білий сон колон, а за ними он захід весь вогні. Є поля тихий сум. Ах, таку б красу, та тобі й мені. These lines impressed me as a child so much that you wouldn't believe it. Me as a child decided to write it from my textbook to my notebook, and I loved it so much back then, and I love it now still. The special things about the Mykola Lukash's translations, it is that they literally were not the lines you're reading in the original. He tried to perceive the feeling, he tried to transfer the feeling to make it very well sounding for the native speakers, for us, for Ukrainians, and it touches something very deeply in the soul of non-French, non-Italian, non-German, non-English speaker who would probably read these lines. And that's what making his translation special. As I told you before, he didn't have time to enjoy this popularity because he wasn't popular. People preferred to publish Russian translations back then. And he was a very interesting, a very eccentric person himself. That led to the event that when Ivan Zuba, one of other writers who were in this official writing community, he wrote the book, the small book, which was called Internationalism or Russification, and he pointed out that Ukrainian literature is in fact forbidden, and because of this, Ivan Zuba was in jail. So Mykola Lukash is doing something unimaginable in the totalitarian state. He is writing to the police a letter, please release Ivan and take me in jail instead. And that was a suicidal. I cannot imagine what was happening in his heart, how fed up he was with all what is going on, and he is outspoken, he's saying it right straightforward, and he's not even saying it, he's writing it in written letters. Of course, he was fired from work, he wasn't imprisoned, luckily, but he was fired and he didn't have the means for living, and for the next 20 years of his life, he earned a little bit here here and there, everything unofficial. He lived in the extreme poverty, and his friends tried to help him. His friends from writing community tried to help him, but his name was so silent that we even don't read it in the dissidents movement's name in the list of dissidents in Ukraine. Basically, even now, it's underestimated what he did back then as a Ukrainian dissident. He's still working and he's still learning the languages. Right after he was fired, he is talking to his friends that I feel bad and what I'm going to do is to study a new language. That's probably how the brain of polyglot always works, and learning a new language is always an option when you want to do something in your life. And let's read another Paul Verlaine's translation made by Mykola Lukash. Streets. Станцюймо джигу. Любив я очі ці ясні, мов зорі ночі осяйні, любив урочі їх вогні. Станцюймо джигу. Вона була і добра, і зла, смутити й тішити могла, моя коханочка мала. Станцюймо джигу. Які п'янкі її уста дізнав, як краще неспроста, коли любити перестав. Станцюймо джигу. Та в серці спомин ще не згас про той щасливий, милий час, коли любов єднала нас. Станцюймо джигу. By the end of his life, Mykola Lukash was kind of rehabilitated. Nobody said, I'm sorry to him, but he was restored in the official community of the Soviet writers. It didn't make much difference for him because at the time he was terminally ill with cancer, and he was restored in his writing rights, official writing rights in 1987, and he would die the next year in 1988. During his life, Mykola Lukash has never enjoyed any kind of glory because only a small amount of people, mostly in these literature circles, were aware of his work, were aware of his personality, especially after he was stripped out of all his rights in this writing community and publishing community. And only after his death in the independent Ukraine, when we really started to introduce the foreign literature to our children in schools, only then it was that the only great translator who did such an amazing job. He translated over 1,000 literature pieces over his life, and he composed 3 dictionaries again during his life, and even after his death, there was a special dictionary saying the comparisons made by Mykola Lukash in the publishing world. It was also given as his basically his heritage, now his legacy for us. And now he's a great translator who is widely recognized, and that's of course I'm happy about that. His legacy is living, and because of him we know so many of the great foreign masterpieces. That's it. That's our video for today. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm waiting for comments, and please leave them in the box below the video. If you can, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. That's how I can create more of such videos. And if you can't, don't forget about your likes. That will help a lot during the video promotion. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you very soon in our next episodes. Goodbye for now.